That was my first time where I was trying to express like, I want to have passion around what I do. I want to do something that I can make money, but also like feel good about and have an interest in and all that stuff. And I think it reverted to this kind of like Chinglish environment, and they would kind of get it, but you can tell they don't totally get it. So then you're just kind of stuck in this weird place where you're both kind of angry at each other because you're not fully comprehending each other.
This is the I'm Uncomfortable podcast, the podcast for people who want to be okay with being uncomfortable. We're your hosts, Vanessa
and Melissa. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the I'm Uncomfortable podcast. Today, it's not just me and Vanessa. We are joined today with a special guest, Angela Lin, who is a co-host of the podcast, But Where Are You Really From? With her lifelong friend, Jessie Lin, of the same name, last name, but not related, I don't think, where they delve into their experiences as Asian Americans navigating first-generation upbringings, which is not a new thing here on this podcast. Vanessa and I constantly talk about our struggles with unlearning a lot of things being a first-generation Filipino American. So Angela is also the co-founder of Real You Mandarin, an online language course designed to help American-born Mandarin speakers express themselves authentically in the language. So we will get to that later in this episode. But through these platforms, Angela aims to bridge cultural gaps and empower others to embrace their multifaceted identities. So with that, Angela, welcome to the podcast. Ready to get uncomfortable with us?
I'm ready.
As is tradition in this podcast, we like to share what's been making us uncomfortable lately. So if you want to share a little tidbit of what's been making you uncomfy lately.
Yeah, I thought about that. I thought about that before we recorded. First, thank you for the lovely intro. I think you mostly got it all. But I will add one thing that I've kind of like explored over the years, especially through the podcast, through Real You Mandarin, through everything I do, is like, even though a lot of times we do ruminate over our identities as Asian Americans or whatever blank Americans, right?
Yes.
I think the big thing I've been coming across, especially even being a digital nomad, living in Asia for many years recently, is like the human aspect of our identities too. I think my co-host and I, we've been doing our show for like 5 years. I think it's the 5th year. It's kind of crazy. But like the topics that you guys gravitated towards that we're going to talk about today are not necessarily about being Asian American, right? And that's something that I've really gravitated towards over all this exploration, is that our identities of coming from, multicultural backgrounds is already grounded in us. So it's not like we necessarily have to talk about Asian topics. It just like comes in all the time when you're trying to like unpack why you have trauma and why you have like all these things, why you have a specific point of view. It naturally comes in. It's just like part of who you are. So that's something that's been really like important for me to discover through all this process. And even like Real You Mandarin is of course geared towards Mandarin speakers, but the whole aim is like, we are, as you mentioned, multifaceted. And I think the kind of mission behind it is unlocking our ability to express our full selves, not letting language necessarily limit us in that way. So yeah, I think that's just been kind of like my theme over the past many years, is coming to terms with the fact that like I'm just trying to figure out who I am as a human, and like all these things play into it, but it's really that like human identity exploration for me. Recent uncomfy moment.
Ooh,
very recent. And yeah, it's not so lighthearted, but I can make it lighthearted. I feel like I had that recent realization where I'm like, am I the villain? I don't know if you've been having that. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So not like as dramatic as that seems, but I listened to some of your recent episodes, so I know you guys are all about self-growth as well. I've been on a self-growth journey for many years, but I feel like it's really easy to fall off because you're just like, life is hard. And so it's not like these are new lessons, but I did reread the 4 Agreements. I don't know if you've read that book. It's a lie. I read the 5 Agreements. He like came up with like a sequel and added a new one. But
it's like, wait, there's more. You guys.
Yeah. Wait, there's more. Let me sell more. But there's and there's so much of it that I'm like, I already knew, but there was one thing that really resonated with me, which was like, don't take things personally, which is easier said than done. But he had a really visual like imagery for me, which was like, imagine that you're going into a movie theater that has just like all these different movies playing. And when you walk in, like the first movie you see, you sit behind somebody and they don't even notice you're there. And you watch the screen and you realize like it's a movie about you. Like you're the main character and then everyone else is like a side character, right? It's like your partner, your family, your best friends, whatever, right? They're all in the movie and they're being portrayed a certain way. And the person in front of you sitting there watching is you, and you don't even notice yourself watching you, right? So it's like super meta. And then he's like,
Okay.
I know.
I was trying to put the image together in my head just now.
I know it's very complicated, but then the next piece I think puts it together is like, he's like, okay, now imagine you exit that movie and you go to like the next theater next door, and you sit down and you realize it's like your partner's movie, and your partner sitting in front of you also doesn't notice you come in. And it's him on the screen, or her, whoever, right, on the screen as the main character. And you see you as a side character. And you don't even recognize yourself in that version because it's how they perceive you, not how you think you're projecting yourself, not how you want even necessarily to be projected. And so I think this has really helped me literally in the last like 24 hours. I like but I'm like, everything that triggers me, every time something happens that's like outside of me and it happens and I don't feel good about it, I'm like, I'm not even in the same movie as this person. Like, what's the point of trying? Why am I trying to like change their movie? I cannot. We're sitting in different theaters right now. So like,
And I love that. And also my brain is like exploding.
I know.
Yeah.
And going back to what you were saying, like the question, am I the villain? Maybe I am the villain in someone's movie.
Exactly.
But
feel like
I'm not,
you always are.
Yeah. But at a certain point, it's how much are you going to ruminate on that, or how much are you going to grind your gears about these things and how people perceive you, and like we're just trying our best.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. No,
We're
that's a
just
good
trying.
one. I need to read that book. I know I've heard of it, but I have not gotten to that book. Maybe I shall put it on my list.
The font size is like font 14. You can easily do it. It's
Okay.
like very approachable.
Sweet.
Love that.
I like need to make my phone screen text bigger now too, like the size. And I was like, oh,
The Kindle, yeah. Kindle
this is
app.
where we're at. Okay, cool. Well, I love that you shared that. I mean, we do talk about self-growth and we also talk about different perspectives. And I too have come to realize that like, yeah, I am the villain sometimes, but that's okay. Sometimes, you're the problem. Sometimes you're not, and it's fine. But I'm really excited that you're on the show because it is nice to see that there are so many parallels between your experience and our experience, even though we are a different brand, I suppose, of Asian, if you want to put it that way. Now, I do want to start off with like a semi-ignorant, potentially question, but my ex-fiance, he is Taiwanese born American. And I was reading an interview that you did where you mentioned going to Taiwanese school or Chinese school on the weekends. And that's where you like learned how to speak Mandarin.
Yeah,
Yes,
kind of
no?
complicated.
Okay.
Yes and no. My mom made us speak Mandarin at home. So
Okay,
in terms of
yeah.
like just speaking, it was my mom. But then we
Okay.
were forced to go to Chinese school. Like if you say it in Chinese, it's literally like Chinese school, regardless of your, family's origin.
Okay, yeah, that's
place.
what he used to call it. He was like,
Yeah.
yeah, every weekend we go to Chinese school.
Yeah.
That's where I learned how to speak Mandarin and blah, blah, blah. Like all his cousins went. And so when we initially were thinking about like what to talk about today, I wanted to ask, because as a Filipino American, it's very much the norm to not teach your kids Tagalog or whatever dialect island that you come from. But I don't feel like that's true in other cultures. And like my, at the time, fiance was talking about how it's like very common that you speak Mandarin if your family speaks it. And I do find that that's something that I've come across a lot. So I just wonder, like, what has your experience been with that? And do you feel like it was sufficient enough? Because I also know that your platform is about the real you and authentically expressing yourself. So like what's the disconnect and why do you feel like that's hard as like an American born
Yeah.
versus the authentic speaker or like,
Yeah. I think the whole like whether your parents choose to teach you or not thing is family dependent. I would say, I can only speak for my personal experience, but most of my friends that are from either Chinese or Taiwanese or some other Mandarin speaking background do know how to speak some Mandarin at least. Although my best friend's husband is exactly in this weird like mix of what you were saying. So he is the oldest son, and when his parents immigrated to the US, they decided they would not teach him Mandarin because they didn't want him to be bullied for having like a Chinese
Oh,
accent when he speaks
yeah.
English.
Okay.
So that was their choice. And then they had another son like 12 years, they have like a huge age gap, like 12 years later or whatever. And they're like, that was regrets. Like, let's redo that. Yeah. They're like, that was the wrong move. So the younger brother can speak Mandarin, the older one cannot, which is kind of sad.
Crazy. That is sad. Normally it's like the other way around, I feel like.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think
Okay.
it totally depends on the family, but I will say everyone is different in terms of like the level of speaking ability, and even beyond speaking, like reading and writing is also a whole different thing. So like Chinese school, I would say was more focused on the reading and writing kind of academic side. The reason why I have that platform, Real You Mandarin, is because I think a lot of us have a similar problem, which is that we think we're fluent. We say we are fluent because you grew up speaking it at home. You're able to, you sound, a lot of people have even like perfect accents, like if you go back to the motherland, it's not like they're like, oh, you sound American, it's not really even at that level. But because we grew up in an English speaking environment and our parents are also immigrants in an English speaking environment, we got away with using Chinglish, so like Chinese plus English a lot. And I don't think a lot of people even realize that's what they're speaking because they're like, no, I'm speaking in Mandarin at home. But no, because there are a lot of concepts that our parents either don't even know how to say in Chinese themselves because that, like, for example, mental health, as if my mom knows any Chinese around mental health, right? But like anything you want to talk about beyond, I'd say like middle school grade level, like
Interesting.
as you're learning about yourself, your identity, the things you actually care about, and you're trying to finally like express yourself, those words aren't necessarily going to come to you in that mother tongue anymore because your parents aren't going to be teaching you that language. So I think a lot of us end up sounding like kids when we speak Mandarin because they understand, everyone understands us. But, at a certain point when you're trying to express things that even culturally are different, like talking about self-care or like self-growth or any of those things, it's not something that my parents even understand if I were speaking Mandarin, like, so
Not in
they're
the realm of the topics that they would even be covering and being able to teach you.
exactly. Or they're hearing about it for the first time in the West, so they only learn the English, name for it.
And so what does
there's
that
just
really mean to them in their
exactly,
context? Yeah.
exactly. So
Okay.
yeah, a whole spiel, but I think that's what it really comes down to. Is like we're pretty limited by our vocabulary to kind of child level expression. Yeah.
Okay, but wait, okay. Yes, agree so much on all of that. And I'm now thinking back to the topics that, Melissa and I talk about all the time in relation to our own family systems and how we try to get our parents to understand things like therapy or, trauma. And we just
Yeah.
did this whole 3-letter project wherein like a lot of our parents' trauma like really like shines through, but I don't think they realize that necessarily. But we're like, ooh, okay, so that's where you get it. But do you feel like the language barrier, I mean, is it a barrier? Like, how has it kind of gotten in the way, I guess, of you talking about things like pursuing things you're passionate about versus just stable, or like finding joy and happiness, mental health? Like, what has the experience been trying to communicate that with like your parents, for example?
It's so hard. I mean, it's so hard because you're not actually, it's something I really came to terms with when I was building out our platform. Because I worked with a Taiwan-based Mandarin teacher to like help me translate and figure out how to actually express these things. And we, even between the two of us, even though she's also a millennial, like we're the same general age range and everything, we had a lot of cultural clashes where like she would translate something one way and I was like, that is not at all what I meant. And it's because she doesn't have the like lived experience of being, for example, like a minority in a majority society. So she was like, I don't know what a token Asian is like. So it was really hard to translate this kind of stuff. So with my parents, like I realized the first time I was getting really frustrated with trying to express what I really wanted to do was even in high school, because I was applying to college and figuring out like what my major was going to be or whatever. And I was, a really quote unquote bad Asian in the sense that I was like, I want to go into music business. Like I want to work at a record label. And they're like, what the hell are you talking about? And so that was my first time where I was trying to express like, I want to have passion around what I do. I want to do something that I can make money, but also like feel good about and have an interest in and all that stuff. And I think it reverted to this kind of like Chinglish environment where I would be speaking in Mandarin and then I'd have to throw in like passion, like literally in English. And they would kind of get it, but you can tell they don't totally get it because English is not their first language. So then you're just kind of stuck in this weird place where you're both kind of angry at each other because you're not like fully comprehending each other, but you're trying to. So I think that's really where you start hitting a wall. Is kind of like, this is the only way I know how to express it is like in English because it's my only language I know fully. And you kind of know English, but not to the same extent. So we're just we're not getting 100% of the communication through.
No, I feel that. When my mom and I used to fight, she used to get really frustrated and she would be like, well, you're just really good with words. And so you twist your words and that's blah, blah, blah. Like, that was her defense or whatever for when she was really mad. And before I was like, why are you saying that? But hearing you talk about it now, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. In her mind, I'm twisting words. In my mind, I'm just trying to express myself, but there's not that same level of understanding. And Melissa's parents are younger than mine by a decent amount, but there's still a gap, I think, in your guys' communication. I don't know. You could share more about it, Melissa.
Yeah, well, I was gonna just I'm trying to find a bridge here because I am in this weird like middle ground where I am first generation Filipino American. My parents did immigrate here from the Philippines, but they came here at such a young age, 10, 11, 12, that age. So going back to what you were saying, Angela, it depends on the family and whether they choose to teach you the language or not. But from my perspective, both my parents came here at such a young age, assimilated to this American culture, and didn't find that Tagalog was really necessary for me in my upbringing. So it just was one of those things where it's just not. It's still not their first. English is still not their first language, but they do know a lot more breadth of vocabulary. But it comes down to when we have our frustrations and misunderstandings with each other with things like passion, and to what you're saying about when you're trying to explain to your parents what you do for a living or what you want to do for a living. When I told them I'm studying journalism and emphasizing in public relations, they're like, what is that? So while they did not pressure me to be any sort of, some of the stereotypes for Filipino Americans is going into nursing or something in the medical field, or if you're a man, you're going into engineering, things like that, those kinds of stereotypes. I'm lucky that I did not experience those firsthand, but there is still this barrier of understanding anything beyond that. Even whether it is a language barrier or just the cultural barrier in general, that's kind of my specific experience.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did not know, Vanessa, that your mom would say that to you about twisting the words.
And I get it now. I do. But when I was younger, obviously it was like on site. I was when she said that, I was like, oh, we're fighting now. Like,
because Vanessa, I like you, you learn Tagalog, you understand Tagalog,
yes.
Yeah, more so than me.
But I can't
sure.
fight in it. Like,
true.
I can't even have a heated, lively discussion in it. Like, I can understand her, and there's certain phrases, of course, in every language that like have a different translation into English, and so I understand at the core some of those phrases what they mean, even without the English translation. But like, yeah, it's just a different experience, and it's been fun. But I also had a question for you, Angela, about the podcast name. Because I've gotten that question a ton. I think Melissa's gotten it a few times, like, well, where are you really from? And so I'm just curious, like, is this like an experience that you've had? Is there a story?
Isn't it
Are
an
there many
experience we've
stories?
all had? Like,
We just want to hear it from you too, you know?
oh,
Like
sure,
what's the
sure.
trauma from that you have?
Ongoing trauma. No, I think, I can't even pinpoint one specific time because it happens all the time. It happens all the time.
Like, it happened yesterday at the
It happens,
supermarket.
truly happens all the time. I will say my like connection to that question though has changed as the podcast has gone on. Also because I mentioned I lived in Asia recently for like a few years, so that really kind of shakes you up as well. Being an Asian American in Asia really makes you ponder your identity. But I got it in the more like the way I think most non-Caucasian people get it, which is like. You're speaking fluent English with an American accent, but for some reason, when someone asks you where you're from and you say California or wherever you're from, they're like, no, really? And it's like, bruh, really? I was born there. I don't know what you want from me. So it really started as like the way I think a lot of us have had it, which is like, we don't know really what they expect from us when we get that question, because I'm telling you the truth. I am American, but for you, it's not enough because I don't appear a certain way.
Yeah.
So that's like the original, connection to that question. But I think as we've been exploring our identities, and when I lived in Asia, it really became like a philosophical question at a certain point. It's like, where am I from? Where am I from? Yeah. I know we're not talking about the digital nomad thing as like the main focus, but I lived in like combination of Japan, Korea, and Taiwan over the last like 2-3 years. Wow. And being an Asian American in Asia, I will say I had never felt more American than being an Asian American in Asia, because they all see that you're, on the outside,
Yeah, they
Asian
know.
appearing. But they're like,
how they know.
oh, they know. And they're like, you're so American. Like it's just it's like bleeding out of you.
Like you've got a flag tattooed on your head or something. Like,
truly.
they're like, you're American.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like a joke when you go and visit the Philippines. It's they smell American on you. Like they can just tell immediately.
My mom legit
by the
told
way
me
you
not
carry
to talk.
yourself. Yeah.
Because we were gonna go to one of those like bargain, places, and she was like, "Don't speak." Literally, I was like, "Okay, but like, just look at me, because I'm not full. Like, I'm mixed." I'm like, "They know. I think they know." But she's like, "Be my guest, girl. You go haggle. I'll just stand here." I'm mute.
But yeah, no, I wanted to just go back to what you were saying. I have not lived in Asia or anywhere outside of the US for that many years, or if ever. But even me visiting an Asian country for 2 weeks at a time in Japan, not only do I not feel like I'm not Japanese, I'm Filipino, but I just definitely felt the most American I've ever felt. I like when I'm here in the US, in California, I identify and I know I am Asian American, I'm Filipino American, and that is who I am. But it just seems so apparent when you are plopped in an Asian country and you're like, oh wow, I really am very American, and they have made it very apparent and clear that. But it's very interesting that philosophical question of, oh, but where am I really from? Because I know that it is an ongoing discussion for those in like Filipinos that are born in the Philippines, live and exist in the Philippines, versus there has been a lot of contention between Filipinos in the Philippines versus Filipino Americans here, and how we are also being cast as not Filipino enough, but then we're also we're not American enough. That's why I think there was just such a correlation between the topics that you cover on your podcast and what we cover in being uncomfortable with in our identities and trying to unlearn those things. You say that you've grown from the original intent of the podcast, but where do you see the conversations continuing to grow in the next, I don't know, 5 more years, since you've been doing it for 5 years?
Oh my gosh. I'm like, will we be doing it for 5 years? Like we try to take it
because we have to. We've been doing this podcast since the pandemic as well. So
yes. Okay. Get it. Because I feel like everyone else's average episodes 7 and then done. Like that is actually like, if you look at the statistics of like pandemic
really?
started podcasts,
Oh,
the average is
interesting.
like
So
7
funny.
episodes and they stopped doing it. Because it's hard work to do a podcast.
Yeah, there's a point where we had to be like, are we going to keep going?
Yes.
Because you either put more in or you bounce, you know? And it's,
Yes.
yeah, we clearly have put more in. So,
We are the same. I think we've really, both of us, Jesse and I, we've kind of just gravitated towards like, I think in the past, we tried really hard to keep the topics focused on like something Asian American. And I'd say around like year 2, we're like, we've had enough of this. Like,
Right.
if something naturally comes in, like, for example, like when Everything Everywhere All at Once came out and quickly became one of my favorite movies, you know, like that is a natural Asian American topic to discuss. But for us, we've really come to terms with the fact like this needs to be interesting for us or it won't be interesting to anyone else. So we're really only talking about topics that we care about. And, you know, it fluctuates, but I will say I personally keep gravitating towards like self-growth, self-awareness, those types of topics. And again, your heritage, your upbringing will always come into that
Tie
mix
into it
anyway.
somehow.
Yeah. So that's kind of where we've been heading. And I think we're also trying not to like give ourselves so much pressure anymore. Like I used to be really obsessive about like, okay, when we don't do seasons per se, but we do what we call like batches because we kind of take like a month or 2 off in between. But I used to be like, 15 episodes has to get to, like, we have to hit 15 and like it's going to be every week and whatever. And it was a lot of pressure because sometimes when we were doing the planning sessions, we'd be like, we only care about like 8 of these topics. I think for us, and this goes to self-growth or self-awareness things too, right? But like everything's energy to a certain extent. And like if your energy is not in it, people can tell as well. So we've really come to terms with just like, let's only do the topics we care about. And if it's 5, it's 5. If it's like 20 for some reason, it's 20. But like only if we really care about it. And the way we do the planning sessions, we kind of like pitch each other. So it's really like you gotta have passion because the other person's just
I
gonna be
love
like,
that.
"Wah,
I love that
wah."
so
Like
much.
if you don't even care, I don't care either.
I
You
don't
know?
get it.
Yeah.
Got it.
No.
Okay, in relation to both your podcast and Real You Mandarin, I do have a question about identity and relationships. Is your husband also Taiwanese?
He is from Spain.
Love it. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think what I'm wondering is being in a relationship with someone who is not of the same culture, what is that like in terms of the translating, not just of language, but also of self? Because obviously we're coming in with different identities that are very much influenced by our parents and their own
Yes.
trauma, their experience, language, blah, 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 right? And I think like there's the American, which we all know. But like well, we all know, right? But like, what has your experience been with that and translating it through that lens?
So much, just so much. And it had a really big influence as well on me wanting to create Real You Mandarin. So even though it's focused on Mandarin, it was all my experiences with language that kind of brought me to this point. So I grew up speaking Mandarin with my family. I learned Spanish from an early age because California, but I did continue it. Like it was my minor in college. I studied abroad in Madrid actually in college and all these things.
Oh, okay.
So it wasn't like, oh, I learned Spanish for him, but it was kind of like, oh, I have to maintain it for him because his family only speaks Spanish.
Oh, wow.
So it is a requirement. And when I was growing up, my mom really emphasized like you have to marry a Chinese speaking boy because otherwise like everything's gonna go to hell essentially.
No, but
And
like that's a common thing I feel like in families to say.
it is. And I really brushed it off at the time, but now that I'm married to someone who does not speak Mandarin, it's really hard. It's really hard because you're not
Like,
only
my mom was
translating. Yeah. You're not only translating language, you're translating culture. You mentioned like personality, right? You're like your whole self. There was a whole period in my relationship with my in-laws where I was like, I don't think they know who I am because they think I'm so quiet and like have like
Right.
no opinions. And I'm like, if you only knew me in English. I
Yeah.
think so much of it has to do with confidence as well. And like, which is everything, right? Like how much you get in your own head. For me with Spanish, it was really like, I'm at a level that is below my Mandarin, but I can speak, I can communicate. Maybe I'm conjugating stuff wrong, but I don't care anymore. I'm like, I'm going to speak in present tense only, but I'm going to like throw it all out and you're going to hear my personality. And I don't care anymore.
I love
So I think
that.
it has to get to that point. But all of that really is kind of what fueled the Real You Mandarin part, because it was like meeting, hitting a wall against, so many different languages of trying to express my actual personality. And I was like, well, this one I can control because this one is like my
That's true. Yeah.
mother language, quote
Right.
unquote. And I want to help other people also surpass that wall, if you will.
Right.
So, yeah.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. Like, to be completely uncomfortable, my ex-fiance, he was Taiwanese, and his parents, like, yeah, they spoke English, but that was not their home language or their comfort language. And so I actually like lived in their house for a little bit, and it was tough because I also felt like they didn't fully know me, and
Yeah.
I didn't know how to help them know me, because like the English that I would use and that they would use, it kind of just felt like we were talking through like a very, I don't know how to explain it, like a language translator almost.
Yeah.
And it's like I felt uncomfortable expressing myself fully in English because I didn't know if I would be received in the way that I was intending it to be communicated. And so then there was always this gap. And like ultimately it did end up being a factor that led to us like separating, at least for me. Cause I was like, I don't know if I can, looking back now, I'm like, wow, it is like your mom had said, real difficult to have there be like a language barrier. And I was like, ooh, it's getting in the way of me feeling like I'm connected to your family. So I'm glad that you're having a positive experience with like the Spanish and the Mandarin, but it really is uncomfortable. I don't know, Melissa, if you've experienced this similarly.
No, I am in awe of this conversation because I obviously have not experienced this in those specific ways, but it's very true. Language is not only the literal words that you're trying to say in the language, it's how it comes off, the tone, the personality that comes through in truly understanding and, like you said, Angela, like expressing who you are to the people that you're speaking to and trying to connect with. In terms of what Vanessa was saying, it's really eye-opening because I could just imagine, yes, Mandarin is the language that you can come at the most strongly in this course, but I could imagine Spanish because I took Spanish my whole life. It's California. I studied in San Diego, very heavy Spanish speaking communities. And, I at one point was very fluent, but I'm pretty sure when I order things and have a conversation with people in Spanish, they're like, I don't know, this is like a robot. Like this is Google Translate,
This is lady.
So, yeah.
Yeah. When I attempt Spanish, it sounds like I'm 5 years old.
Yeah. So there's that barrier. But I love that you've created this solution for yourself and for others.
Yeah. Well, we usually ask people, Angela, how can they get more comfortable with the uncomfortable topic we're talking about? I think we talked about a lot. I think we talked about expressing yourself to your parents, expressing yourself to a partner, to their family. And I think also just for your platform, for Real You Mandarin, the idea of allowing yourself to learn how to more adequately, I guess, express who you are. So if someone's struggling with language as a barrier in any of those categories, what would you tell them? What advice would you have for them?
Just try. I think the thing that we a lot of times get stuck with in so many things in life, right? But like as someone who is a perfectionist also, it often gets in my way when I don't have the ability to control everything and to like make something come out perfectly. And so I don't try, or I'm like doing so much stuff in the background, but like not sharing it with anybody. And especially when it comes to language, I mentioned the Spanish thing, right? Like I got so frustrated that my in-laws, I felt like they didn't really know me, that I was like, I just don't care anymore. I'm going to sound like, I eat food, like I'd rather like say that
You eat
with
that
like
food, girl.
passion and like have my personality come out than for me to just stay silent and like not be heard. And I think with like my platform, Real You Mandarin, but with anything else, it really is like you don't know what you're missing out on until you like try. And like especially with language, it's almost impossible unless you're just like, you have like endless time and like you're also a genius or whatever to like get so perfect at speaking a second or third language that should not be your goal. So like actually, we didn't really talk about the format of Real You Mandarin, but our whole thing is being practical. So it's not like a textbook at all. All of the content is short videos where we're role playing a literal conversation that you might be having. So I mentioned like mental health. There's one and a lot of it's based on like real conversations I've had with my parents or like,
oh my God, yes.
yeah. So one's like,
Might as well use
I know.
your real life experience.
well, it's what so many people are going to try to be expressing anyway, right? So
Yeah,
the
right,
mental
yeah.
health one, for example, is like me being like, oh, I've been seeing a therapist and like I've been finding it really helpful. And my mom being like, are you crazy? Like, why do you need to see a shrink? You know, like, so that, yeah. So it's role playing literal conversations you probably have tried to had or want
my
to
gosh.
have, and
Okay.
you don't know the words and you're kind of like subbing in English right now. And so we teach in context that way. So you can hear what the dialogue would actually sound like, learn the vocab you'd be missing, and also have a chance to kind of practice shadowing, like repeating back essentially like in that role. So I'm not selling you that you're going to learn all of Mandarin. You're definitely not. But maybe you're going to feel a little bit more confident approaching these topics that you've wanted to have in real life, armed with some like real vocab.
Yeah, and it's not about being perfect. It's about being able to, because I'm going back to when I was learning Japanese in preparation for my trip to Japan, and imperfect bad Japanese was so much better than me not saying something. I at least know like the base words and a couple of different phrases that I knew from others that have gone that I should know and learn, and that helped me so much just to get by and have normal conversations with people, even if it's me coming from like my elementary school level of it. But yeah, no, I love that perspective.
That's so great. Okay. And I love that you're grounding it in like actual
Practical.
scenarios that I mean, all of us have honestly struggled to communicate to our family and maybe even people near us. Okay. Well, we always push people to get uncomfortable. So if people want to get more uncomfortable with you specifically, please let them know where they can find you.
Yes. We're Real You Mandarin on everything. So Instagram, realyoumandarin.com, TikTok, all of it's Real You Mandarin. And if you want to listen to my podcast, it's Where Are You From Pod is the Instagram handle, but
We'll
where
share
you're really
those.
from
We'll
anywhere
tag.
else. Yeah, thank you. And actually, if anyone is a Mandarin speaker and interested in a different kind of podcast, I just launched it literally like 2 weeks ago. Really Mandarin, the podcast. It's all Mandarin language. And essentially all my guests are Mandarin teachers, and we're trying to have like quote unquote real conversations. And I'm asking them to live correct me in real time if I like don't know the word or I use it incorrectly.
That's so uncomfortable. I love it.
It's super uncomfortable for me. It's like I'm sacrificing myself for everyone else to learn. But yeah, so if you are a Mandarin speaker and interested in listening to that, Really Mandarin the podcast. Yeah.
Okay, you go, Angela. Oh my gosh.
Thank you.
Wow, thanks so much for sharing your experience with us. I hope that people who are listening feel more comfortable with the idea of joining. And if you're looking for Angela, you now know where to find her. We will include the links in our...
Oh, sorry. I totally forgot to mention.
Please,
I'm giving your listeners a discount as well. So if you if you're interested in joining the course that we have, Really Mandarin Beginnings, it covers so many topics. It's like wild. But it's everything from like dating and pop culture through mental health, media representation, like real stuff. You can get 10% off using code uncomfortable10. So just use that on the website.
Cute. Thank you again, Angela, for coming on, sharing your perspective with us, that whatever language barrier we're experiencing, whatever culture where we come from, there's always going to be these uncomfortable topics, and it's all about trying it, even though you're uncomfortable with it, because it's better to try and grow from it and learn from it than not doing it at all. So thank you again, Angela.
Thank you both for having me. I had so much fun.
Want more of the I'm Uncomfortable podcast?
Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at imuncomfortable.podcast. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and join our Facebook group, the I'm Uncomfortable Club, to gain early access to our episodes and exclusive content. We're available wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.